Hello, Mr. Ritter, and thank you for your time. This is your first question. Uh, we've seen a dramatic paradigm shift in military industrial equipments. Trillion-dollar systems like the F-35 and Patriot interceptors have failed on the live battlefield against Iran's asymmetric doctrines. As a former military officer, how do you assess the catastrophic hit to the Wall Street? Has this war officially turned the war profiteering business model into a negative growth trap for defense giants like Lockheed Martin and other uh, factories who build these kind of expensive equipments?
Well, first of all, to understand that, to answer this question, we have to go back in time because there was a time when the United States knew how to fight and win wars, where we have a defense industry that produced material that made the American fighting man stronger and allowed us to persevere on the field of battle, even in a sustained conflict. And this, was a model that worked well in World War II. It's a model that served us during the Cold War. We were ready to fight large-scale ground combat operations in Europe and anywhere in the world. We proved that during Operation Desert Storm, where we mobilized 750,000 military personnel and sent them to the Persian Gulf to defeat the world's fourth largest army. But then the Cold War ended, and there was sort of a paradigm shift. We stopped being willing to pay for, because these militaries that exist to be able to, on a moment's notice, fight large-scale ground combat, they're very expensive to build, to maintain, to sustain, to train. And we were looking for a peace dividend. And so we began to de-emphasize large-scale ground combat because we believed with the demise of the Soviet Union, there would be no need for large-scale ground combat. And we thought to maximize our status as the world's sole remaining superpower. And so our goal became not to defeat an enemy, but to intimidate an enemy. And one way you intimidate an enemy is through the perception of technological supremacy, so that the enemy believes that the weapons the United States has are so superior to anything they have, they do not want to engage in a fight. And if the United States does engage into a fight, it's supposed to be a very short duration fight where we overwhelm people with the majesty of our technology. And it worked. We intimidated people here, there, everywhere. But look, there's two examples in recent history where it didn't work. Afghanistan, where the Taliban just said, we're going to fight. And in Iraq, where the resistance said, we're going to fight. And there, American technological supremacy meant nothing because it became a battle on the ground between soldiers. The United States was not ready to engage in this kind of fight. We were casually averse. We didn't fully commit. And so we defeated ourselves. It's not as though the Taliban beat us. The fact of the matter is, in every stand-up fight, we beat the Taliban. They can't beat us. We have technological supremacy. They just weren't willing to quit. And they kept coming at us. And they persevered. And in Iraq, it's the same thing. Every stand-up fight we won, hands down. But we lost the will to sustain. It became a political defeat. But it wasn't a military defeat because we were never decisively engaged. With Iran, this is a game-changing moment because Iran decisively engaged us, not on their terms, on our terms. We're the ones who dictated the terms. We're the ones who initiated the attack. We're the ones who, brought together, as much of our American technological supremacy and Israeli technological supremacy, which is modified American technological supremacy, and said, we will beat you. We will intimidate you. You will collapse. You will fall down. And Iran didn't. Iran stood there, paid a price. Let's not pretend that Iran didn't pay a price. I mean, you don't go 37 days with two modern air forces using very advanced technology and not pay a price. But Iran was not defeated. We were, because our model doesn't work over time. Our model is shock and awe. Our model is to intimidate. And when an enemy, an opponent, is willing to stand there and pay the price, stand there and not retreat, we can't sustain that fight. We lost this war because we ran out of ammunition. We lost this war because we ran out of the ability to continue this fight. We lost this war because Iran had a better model. People can call it an asymmetric model. I don't. I think Iran didn't build something to oppose us. Iran built something to maximize Iran's capabilities. They went deep underground. They developed very effective weapons. They have a political system that has resilience and sustainability. And the most important thing is they have a nation of people who rallied around the cause of their nation when their nation most needed this support. Our shock and awe couldn't defeat them. We couldn't defeat them politically, we couldn't defeat them economically, and we couldn't defeat them militarily. And when we speak of war, remember, Clausewitz says war is an extension of politics by other means. And politics is both politics and the economy. Go back to 1992 and Bill Clinton's famous little statement on his war room, it's the economy, stupid. That's all American politics is about, is the economy. So Iran won this war hands down. And this is the paradigm shift, because the United States of America has never before been defeated on the field of battle. Never in our entire history has a nation stood up to us and beat us in our own game. Iran has just done that. And now this is a shock, because our entire posture globally is predicated on our ability to intimidate, to make people back down, on the perception of American power. But we now have been shown that if a nation is willing to stand up and pay the price, the United States can and will be defeated. Not politically, but militarily. See, this is the difference. Iran beat us in a military fight. This isn't just about the American people losing the will to fight. This is about the American military not being able to accomplish the mission militarily because Iran did it better. And this is a game changer, because now the Russians, the Chinese, everybody learns from this, and there's a recognition now. Look, in Europe, prior to this conflict, people were saying, yeah, Russia may be good on the battlefield, but if the United States and Europe bring to bear the totality of their air power, their air supremacy, the F-35, the F-22, the JDAM, all these things, Russia will collapse. Well, we brought the totality of all that and more against Iran, and Iran didn't collapse. The lesson learned here is that air power is overhyped. The technology is overhyped. And the other thing is it's very expensive. We burned through this expensive ammunition at prodigious rates, and we can't replace it. And this only magnifies the scope and scale of the defeat, because the defeat isn't just about now. The defeat is about the long duration. Iran strategically defeated the United States.
Dr. Mahandi.
Yes, I agree. I think Scott is absolutely correct. The United States has lost wars, but not they didn't lose any of the battles. They lost because they didn't have the stamina. Ironically, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, to a large degree, it was also due to Iran that they could not maintain their occupation, because the Iranians were supporting the Taliban, because the Iranians, despite their enormous differences with the Taliban, with regards to women, with regards to the rights of women and the rights of different communities and cultures in Afghanistan, but Iran still believed that the occupation, the U.S. occupation, was evil, and that it was harmful for Iran and for the entire region. So Iran gradually built, under General Soleimani, a relationship with the Taliban. And interestingly, he did help the Taliban evolve somewhat, not to the degree that we would like to see, but still they're not the Taliban of the era of 9/11 and so on. It's much more moderate, perhaps, than then. And the same is true in Iraq. But as Scott said, this is a totally different war. And if one takes, and here I want to pay tribute to Ayatollah Khamenei, the martyr, because if one follows Iranian politics, which is very complicated, and Piers Morgan often when he argues with me, he thinks that like this is a dictatorship where no one can speak, and it's, you know, the exact opposite. You have different factions, different parties, and everyone, you know, they're at each other's throat often. And one of the key debates that existed in Iran for the last 3-4 decades was Iran's military posture and Iran's military strategy, and developing a missile program, developing a drone program. It was ridiculed, not only in the West by Western media and Western think tankers, but inside Iran, many people were ridiculing the armed forces and making fun of their progress, and saying all this is just wasted money, the underground cities and the different technologies that Iran was pursuing and developing indigenously. And they were saying this is just money wasted. But Ayatollah Khamenei persevered, and he believed that at the end of the day that Iran was facing a real threat from the empire, and the only way to counter that threat is to have a defense capability that can stand up to that threat. So instead of purchasing a number of airplanes, expensive airplanes, and helicopters, and the sort of military equipment that you see ordinary armed forces across the world purchase for their military, he chose a different path, because he knew that at the end of the day, on the battlefield, if we want to face the empire with the tools of the empire would definitely defeat us. We wouldn't have the firepower. Our air force would soon be decimated. Even if we had the most advanced jets, or if we had the most advanced equipment, we'd be outgunned, we'd be outnumbered, and we'd be defeated. So he and his military advisors and those who were leading the armed forces had to think about how to develop a defensive and offensive military strategy that would be able to outlast aggression from the most powerful country in the world. And it worked, to the astonishment of the world. During the war, I've been in contact with friends from China and Russia, friends of Iran. And it was clear during the first few days, they all thought that Iran, especially during the first 3-4 days, they all thought Iran was going to collapse. They were very polite about it. They were very curious about what was going on. They were listening to me when we had conversations. But it was clear that they were very skeptical about Iran's capability to stand up. And after a week, or I don't remember precisely. Each person was a bit different from the other. But after a week, 10 days, things were changing. And the same is true, and I believe this. The same is true within Iran itself. There were those in Iran who were confident of a victory. I can't give numbers, but they were a large segment of society, maybe 50%, I don't know. But the other half, perhaps, again, I'm just guessing. These are not based on any knowledge. I'm throwing a number out there. The other half of society were skeptical. They were they were concerned, even though everyone remained calm. And that was one of the very interesting things about the first week of war. There was no rush on shops and to buy bread or gasoline. And of course the leader was martyred, but despite that, things were calm. But gradually, after week 10 days, everyone grew extraordinarily confident. So I think that Scott was a professional soldier. I was just a volunteer during war. I was never an officer. I don't claim to know much about warfare. But I think that what happened in this war will be taught at military academies in important countries across the world for many decades to come.
I could just follow up on that real quick. Before the war started, people asked me how I thought this would unfold. And I put on my professional military officer's hat, and I said, look, I understand politicians, but professional military officers, commanders, don't normally engage the enemy unless they are confident in their ability to defeat the enemy. And we knew what the military problems facing us were with Iran. First and foremost, we needed to secure the Strait of Hormuz long term. We could lose it short term, but we needed to secure it long term. And we need to have the confidence that no matter what, when conflict termination came about, we controlled the Strait of Hormuz, not Iran. That's an absolute initial going in. And so I believe that if our politicians were going to order an attack against Iran and our military was going to concur, that we had to have had a plan, because it doesn't make any sense to begin a war and not have a plan. We had to have had a plan. And I said, if we have a plan, knowing the US military, it might very well succeed because we are professional. We don't play around at war normally. And the other thing was ballistic missiles, that we knew what the problem is. We faced this with Iraq and we lost. We had to learn our lessons. We knew what needed to be done to suppress a ballistic missile capability. And we knew that if we were going to engage Iran, they were going to decisively respond with missiles and drones. And we needed to have a plan to suppress this, to defeat it, to overcome it. And if we were going to go to war, that we had to be confident that this plan was going to work. What happened is we went to war with an assassination plan. The easiest plan in the world, to murder a man who's at his own home, not hiding. I mean, it's not a feat of military arms, what we did to Ali Khamenei. It's actually a crime, what we did. But having said that, where was the rest of it? We didn't have a plan. We didn't even consider those options. That's the shocking thing. Because once this war started and I realized we didn't have a plan, Iran's victory was inevitable. Inevitable. If we don't have a plan going in, and Iran has been preparing for over 2 decades for this very conflict, we're going to lose that war. So to me, I wasn't confident in Iran's ability to prevail when the war started, because naively, I believed that my country would be better prepared for this war, that we would have studied our enemy and that we would have made the preparations necessary to overcome the enemy's preparations, or else the military leaders should do what all professionals do. Tell their political bosses, we lack the military capability to accomplish this mission at this time. If this is the mission you want us to accomplish, you need to let us accumulate sufficient power to carry out the task. And if the military said, yes, we're going to do this, I believed, based upon past prior experience, that we would have the capabilities. It turns out we didn't. We didn't even consider it. We just assumed that by assassinating Ali Khamenei, Iran would collapse and everything else would solve itself. That's amateur hour. That's political immaturity, and that's a lack of professionalism on the part of the U.S. military that's unprecedented in our history. We've never gone into a fight this ill-prepared.
Mr. Ritter, the next question is about the future of the big military factories who has big lobbies in the decision-making process in the government. And what do you assess about the future of these companies? Will they lose a lot of money, the stocks will go down, or this war will let them profit more?
Well, given the fact that the United States national security structure has been hijacked by the military-industrial community, it's all about war profiteering. One of the reasons why we have the military we have is because we stopped caring about winning a war and we cared more about making money. When you produce the most expensive weapons, that doesn't necessarily guarantee an outcome on the battlefield. You need sustainability. Instead of the most expensive weapons, you need a weapon that works very good, and you can produce enough of it, because war is inherently dangerous and you're going to lose equipment. So if you have very expensive equipment and you lose it, it's hard to replace that equipment, especially in a timely fashion. Now, when I say the United States lost the war with Iran, we did. There's no doubt about that. But the American people aren't aware of that defeat. The Iranian army isn't occupying Washington, D.C., burning down the White House yet. The who knows what the future holds? But thank goodness, no, we haven't been occupied. The American people, our cities haven't been bombed. We're asleep at the wheel. And so therefore we're susceptible to propaganda that says our military is strong, we need to continue to fund this, our weapons are the best in the world. I go back to, again, Desert Storm, where we were told that the Patriot missile shot down every Scud that was fired. Turns out it didn't shoot down any Scuds, but Raytheon told a lie that was promulgated by the US government, and more contracts were put out for a weapon system that simply doesn't work. Today, we know that many of the systems that we used in the conflict didn't work as advertised and are just too expensive to replace on a basis. One would think a defeat of this scope and scale would trigger a revolution in military industrial arms procurement, that we would say we have to do it better. But what the US government did is instead hold a meeting of the defense industry, and their solution wasn't to retool, reconfigure, rearm with better weapons. It was to double down on stupid, so to speak. Every weapon system has been determined to be the right weapon system. And we're not going to change anything except we're going to buy more of them. And this is what's happening. So this means that the profits will continue to accrue, that we will not improve our national security. In fact, by procuring weapons we know don't work at great expense, we're actually weakening the United States going forward. But it doesn't matter, because the defense industry doesn't exist to make the American fighting man lethal. It exists to make the American congressperson wealthy. It's a very corrupt cycle right now. And that's what we see. We see the corruption is absolute. Nothing's going to change. We're just going to continue to enrich the defense industrialists and our elected representatives in this perverse cycle of corruption. And we don't learn anything therefore. So if we do have to fight another war, I am somebody who promotes peace over war, but if we do have to fight another war against a determined enemy, we're just guaranteeing the same outcome. We're going to lose.
نظر شما درباره این کاسبان جنگ چیه و حالا فارغ از این بحثایی که آقای ریتر فرمودن؟
I agree. I think that there will be no real change in the United States, and the military-industrial complex will continue to make huge money. Already, the Secretary of War is demanding the budget be raised, I think 50%, if I'm not mistaken, Scott. So the profits of these companies are assured. Perhaps outside of the United States, some countries will begin rethinking purchases, maybe start developing their own indigenous technologies or purchasing from other countries like the Chinese or the Russians or perhaps the Iranians now, but they'd be smart to purchase from Iran. But still, since the United States on its own spends more than the top 10 countries in the world combined, and if this budget increase is implemented and Congress agrees to it, I hear that it would be the equivalent of the top 20 countries in the world. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but that's what I've heard. So I don't think they're going to be losing much money. They'll be gaining money, maybe lose a few markets here and there across the world, but they'll be making huge money in the United States. Personally, I think that maybe Scott sees it differently. I think the collapse of the Soviet Union was and the defeat of Saddam Hussein in Kuwait were two catastrophes really for the United States, because ironically, because the war in Iraq gave sort of swept away the ghosts of Vietnam. And after Vietnam, the United States became a much more cautious country when it came to using military force. We saw that in Lebanon when the U.S. Marines were killed. They withdrew. Reagan understood that this is not the place to try to remain there and occupy, and he pulled his troops out. But I think afterwards, after Iraq, the United States became much more arrogant, the political elite, and a sense of invincibility grew. And then with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the notion of the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama put forth, which still exists, even though he himself, his views have, I mean, they're somewhat misrepresented and they also evolved later. But that notion of the end of history was something I think that many American elites believed in. And so this made the United States much more aggressive, much more arrogant, and in their arrogance they underestimate adversaries. And I think the most important case by far was that of Iran. But you can also see it in, for example, in Ukraine with Russia, where at the beginning of the war, despite Russia being much larger than Iran, they still believed that Russia would fold. I remember I was in Vienna at that time with the nuclear team negotiating the revival of the nuclear deal under Dr. Bagheri, and that war started. And every day, because I was their media advisor, so every day I was speaking to Western diplomats, journalists, academics, and so that was basically my job. And I remember speaking to so many of these journalists and elites, and saying that you should do a deal with Iran. A dark, years of difficulty are approaching. It's going to be a dark winter for Europe without Russian energy in the years to come. And they just ignored this. They said, no, Russia is going to lose this war in just a few weeks, and they'll collapse. And I think that's the arrogance of empire, that they assumed that they can defeat anyone. And of course, in Ukraine, it didn't go as planned, but in the case of Iran, it's very different, because the United States itself came forward, and it brought all of its capabilities. And in addition to that, the Israelis were there, and the family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, they were literally funding this war to a large degree. And so I think they thought that this was an assured victory. So this failure, although Iran, Iran was very sophisticated in developing its indigenous capabilities and its military strategy, offensive, defensive, and as Scott said, the United States had there were many reasons for the United States to fail, but also I think it's that arrogance of power, the notion that the United States looked down upon its enemy, feeling that it's inferior and less sophisticated, less capable, and then it found out the hard way that the Islamic Republic of Iran is indeed very sophisticated, very capable, very good at organizing its and designing a defense strategy, an offensive strategy that works against the global superpower. But in general, I think that is the flaw of empires, that the arrogance of empire leads them to gradually see their designated adversaries as small and insignificant and incapable.
Allow me a quick follow-up. I agree 100% about the arrogance because it blinds you to reality. Let's go back to the Cold War. During the height of the Cold War in the 1970s and 80s, the United States maintained a permanent force of around 250,000 troops in Europe on war footing, immediate war footing, ready to fight a war on day one. Every morning they woke up, they were ready to fight a major ground combat operation against the Soviet Union. We also had the ability within 10 days to fly in an additional 300,000 troops who would marry up with equipment and be able to go to war immediately. This requires so much preparation, so much training, and it's all logistics based. It's all about, it's not about the fighting. The fighting's the easy part. The hard part is the logistics to make this happen. In 1985, while we were prepared to do that, I was with the Rapid Deployment Force, and we were planning to intervene in Iran in case of a Soviet incursion. There was fear that the Soviets would take advantage of, their strength in Afghanistan to come down and take warm water ports. Chabahar was one that we were focused on. And so we had a plan to forcefully seize Chabahar and project power into Iran. And the plan was 60,000 Marines would seize Chabahar, and then 120,000 U.S. Army forces follow on, would move with the Marines forward to confront the invading Soviets in the passes of the Zagreb Mountains. That was the plan. But this was forcible entry, meaning that we were coming in hard. We could do this because Iran didn't have missiles, and the Russian missiles weren't there. So we could use World War II type amphibious tactics to push ashore. And then the logistics, the flow of material in, we had amphibious shipping ready to do that. We modified that plan to go to war against Iraq. The plan that we used to fight Iraq at Desert Storm was a modification of this plan. But anybody who was involved in this planning for Iran looked at Iraq and said, hey guys, there's a problem. What if the Iraqis oppose us? See, the greatest mistake Saddam Hussein made was to allow us to land in Kuwait, to allow us to land, not in Kuwait, to allow us to land in Saudi Arabia. Scud missiles coming down on those ports would have changed the entire world. Scud missiles hitting airfields would have changed the entire war. We couldn't have flowed in the troops the way we did without opposition. That was the greatest mistake he made. But anybody who understood what we were planning on doing in Iran, forcible entry, and how difficult that is, understood how easy we had it in Desert Storm, that we were very fortunate that Iraq didn't oppose us, that Iraq stood by and did nothing while we built up this power that then won the war. But the winning of the war was very hard, very hard. And we made it look easy, but nothing about war on that scale is easy, especially the logistics. But then the war ended, and we became infected with the arrogance of the victor. We looked at the result without understanding how we achieved the result and what the factors that were involved in it. And we began to take away all of those expensive things that made this possible. The pre-positioned equipment, the pre-positioned amphibious shipping, of the troops, the training. We got rid of it all, and we just assumed that if we went to war, we'd achieve the same outcome. We were looking for the same outcome without doing the work. And that's where we are today. We have arrogant people. I'm getting a little old in the tooth, meaning that I've been around the block. I have some experience, but the people I'm older than almost all of the generals in the U.S. military today. I'm older than they are. I have experiences they don't have. The vast majority of the American senior military leadership don't know anything about the Cold War. They're unfamiliar with Desert Storm. All they know is the arrogance of the decade of the 90s and 2000s, where we assumed victory everywhere without paying the price. They didn't understand the complexity of logistic support and of planning involved. And that's one of the reasons why we failed, because we assumed an outcome without doing the work. And I agree with you 100% about the arrogance, but I just wanted to point out what that means, the arrogance. It means that we stopped being military professionals. And it's shameful as an American to understand that the U.S. military has forgotten how to fight and win a war.
Okay, Mr. Ritter, the next question is about the Strait of Hormuz. It is one of the most important issues in this war. Do you have my voice, Mr. Ritter? Do you have my voice?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Do you have my voice, Mr. Ritter? Can you hear me?
I can't. It was just coming in fuzzy, and I'm deaf, so I have to turn my ear to hear.
Okay. The next question is about the Strait of Hormuz. It is one of the most important phenomenon in this war, and the blockade Iran put on the Strait of Hormuz and the blockade the U.S. military put on Ritter. And do you think the U.S. military is capable of opening the strait? And what do you think is the future of governance over the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, again, this ties into what Professor Morandi and I were discussing earlier. we know for a fact that in 1988, I believe, the United States reflagged tankers, and we escorted them through the Strait of Hormuz. A demonstration of American military power and determination in saying that we will not allow the strait to be closed, we will not allow nations to threaten shipping. And it succeeded. We succeeded because our potential enemies lacked the capacity to defeat the United States military in a stand-up fight. Then we had the Gulf War, where once again the American military flowed through into the Persian Gulf. There were mines, but we overcame the mines, and we got this confidence that no matter what, the United States would always be able to project power into the Strait of Hormuz, through the Strait of Hormuz, and control the Strait of Hormuz. And so we just made assumptions that this would be done. The Fifth Fleet was installed in Bahrain and given the mission of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. And they simply did what we used to do, but with less. Because you see, we got weaker and weaker and weaker. So instead of having large flotillas go through, we put some minesweepers through, we put a destroyer through. Every once in a while we put a carrier through and then brought it back out because carrier doesn't have a life expectancy of very long, even in the Persian Gulf. But we convinced ourselves that simply by sailing ships and flying airplanes, that we would keep the Strait of Hormuz open. Again, the Iranians are smarter than we are, because the Iranians took a look at the force projection of the United States and said, how do we defeat this? We do it through area denial munitions. We create missiles that are able to project lethality into this area, and we make the missiles survivable. We have enough missiles so that if the enemy comes at us and bombs this, that, and the other thing, we can still sustain the pressure. They planned the long fight. And again, the United States wasn't prepared for the long fight. We lacked the capacity to achieve the objective up front, and we lacked the capacity to achieve the objective over time. So the Iranians could take control of the Strait of Hormuz indirectly through firepower and sustain that over time. And I don't know when exactly the Iranian supremacy was achieved. I would say that it was a while ago. It's been a long time that Iran has actually had this capability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, but the United States never woke up to this reality. But the interesting thing is, was it 2020 that Iran shot down a Global Hawk over the Strait of Hormuz, I believe, in late 2020, around that time. And President Trump said, I'm going to bomb Iran in retaliation. And he was prepared to strike the air defense sites in Iran that shot down the Global Hawk. And his military advisors said, well, excuse me, Mr. President, here's the problem. If we bomb Iran, they're going to retaliate. And their retaliation will be against our bases and against our regional allies. And then we will have to escalate and retaliate them. And then we'll be into a general war where the Strait of Hormuz will be shut down and energy manufacturing in the region will be attacked. And now we're going to run into the reality that we not only can't ship energy out of the Strait of Hormuz, but they stopped producing energy. And then the question is, what do we do? Because we don't have the ability to project this power. And to assimilate, to build up this power will take months, if not years. They estimated that we would need 900,000 to 1.2 million American forces to physically move in and take control. And then the question was, even if we did that, how do we move in? Because this isn't 1985 when Scott Ritter planned the amphibious assault on Chabahar. Iran now has area denial munitions that can attack shipping as it comes in closer. And we can't guarantee the projection of the force or the sustainability of the force. So it would take us many, many months to build up the force, and we can't guarantee you victory even after that. Do you really want to start this fight, Mr. President? And the answer was no. And so he didn't bomb. The reason why I bring this up is that we knew that in 2020. We knew we couldn't do it. We knew that we couldn't seize the Strait of Hormuz. We knew that Iran could shut it down at any time. So armed with this knowledge that we acted on, it wasn't theoretical, we went to war against Iran, assuming what? That we could take over the Strait of Hormuz? This is lunacy. We can't take over the Strait of Hormuz. This, Professor Marani and I have had a long conversation over time about Iran's nuclear program, and, I've spoken with others about whether Iran should have a nuclear bomb or whether it's right for them to acquire it. And I've always said no, Iran shouldn't have a nuclear bomb. Not only from law, but Iran doesn't need a nuclear bomb. And Iran proved that point. Iran has 2 nuclear weapons. One is their ballistic missile force. It's non-nuclear, but it can achieve nuclear type results by eliminating energy production in a region where the world needs that energy production. And two, its ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. This is the ultimate nuclear bomb. So, you know, Iran, there's nothing I can see that changes this equation other than a change in political leadership in Iran. It will require a revolutionary change in political leadership to get Iran to give up this strait. And even then, I don't imagine any Iranian government's going to give that up, because this is what guarantees their national security going forward. But most importantly, this Islamic Republic is stronger today than it has been since, I mean, Professor Marandi could probably tell me better, but since the revolution. I mean, the people of Iran seem to have rallied around their government like they've never rallied around it before. I mean, again, I might be reading too much into anecdotal things, but you know, there's these Iranian filmmakers that make these Lego movies. They're very effective here in the United States. It's some of the best information operation imaginable. It's hard to believe that the Iranian intelligence doesn't control them, but they claim that they're. But my understanding is that they were part of the political opposition before this war. Not violent opposition, but people who said, yeah, we're not so happy with the government, this, that, and the other thing. Today, they're right there. That's Iran. People who might have said, I'm not so happy, I'm not happy about the economy, I'm not happy about this. Not violent revolutionaries, those are unpatriotic. How about average Iranians who are just unhappy with the situation, which is normal in any country, by the way. It's not being critical. You know, if you have a people that aren't unhappy, you're doing something wrong, because people should always be unhappy, because they should always be holding you to a high standard, seeking a better life. But what point I'm trying to get at is these people who were not the best friends of the regime before the war are now openly advocating on behalf of the regime in one of the most effective ways possible. And this to me seems to be Iran, that the Iranian people have pushed away petty differences and have rallied around the nation of Iran. And the nation of Iran today is defined by Islam. We can't pretend that it's not defined by Islam. So the simplistic notion that we can kill the supreme leader and make the Islamic Republic go away and be replaced by a secular entity ruled over by the son of a failed Shah. I mean, no rational human being could ever buy into that notion. But Iran today has a solid government, a solid people who are solidly aware that they hold the world hostage by controlling the Strait of Hormuz. They don't want to hold the world hostage. They would prefer to have the strait opened up and energy flowing, but they are able now to tell the world that if you dare attack us again, we will strangle you. Before it was a theoretical weapon. Now it is a demonstrated weapons capability that I think will actually guarantee peace going forward, because there's no force capable of taking the Strait of Hormuz from Iran in a reasonable fashion. What I mean by that is, if Iran shuts the Strait of Hormuz, the global economy will collapse, the regional economy will die before any force capable of taking the Strait of Hormuz from Iran could be assembled. So it's Iran's ultimate weapon. And I think Iran is correct in not giving it up.
Okay, thank you for joining us. And you had a very good talk at the start of the war, and you said U.S. lost the war because they didn't know Imam Hussein or Imam Mahdi. Based on the way you think about the situation, do you have any more comment for Iranian people who see this show? And is there any more comments that you want to add?
Is there any more comments I'd like to add? Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation that lasts hours and days. I mean, one of the reasons why we're in this situation today is because of the ignorance of the American people about the reality of Iran. Look, I last traveled to Iran in 2005, and that's a long time ago, 21 years. But I remember landing in Iran and being totally surprised by what I saw because of my ignorance. I thought I'd see something, I saw something else. I saw a reality. I saw the reality of the Iranian people. And this was during the presidency of Ahmadinejad, when, you know, anti-American sentiment was supposed to be at its all-time highest. And the amount of love I experienced. I mean, human love, meaning from human to human. The way the Iranian people just said, "My goodness, an American is here in our country. Welcome. Thank you for coming." Was amazing. But the other thing was how much they knew about the United States. I went to a restaurant to eat, and I had a family come up to me in tears. I said, "Why are you crying?" I mean, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings by coming to Iran." They said, no, we want to give you our condolences." I said, "For what?" They said, "We saw the flooding in Houston, and we saw a family swept away, and it's just terrible, and we send our heartfelt, best wishes to you and the American people." And I just sat there and go, wait a minute. I'm just being honest here. The average American sees about a earthquake in Iran that collapses a city, as has happened. Our first instinct isn't to pick up the phone and call an Iranian and say, "Hey, we're sorry, what happened?" Our heart goes out. Most Americans go, "Well, they're Iranians. They sort of deserve it. Those silly ragheads. God gave them what they deserved." The kind of ignorance, because we don't view the Iranians as people. We don't view them as humans. We view them as, you hear savages as a word that's often used in American social media. Those Iranian savages, and it's spoken from the government. The government says these words. The President of the United States says these words. And that echoes down amongst the American people who are ignorant about the reality of Iran. I don't claim to be an expert on anything, and I know I'm not, especially Iran. There's some things I'm good at. There's some things I'm just a student of. I'm a student of Iran. I'm in constant learning mode. But as a student, I understand this, that if we're going to talk about Iran and the Islamic Republic, and we can't speak in an intelligent, conversant manner about Ali, Hassan, Hussein, Karbala, Ashura, then there's no reason to have any conversation, because it means we don't understand the Iranian people. We don't understand how they think, what motivates them, etc. And if that's just the reality, that the Iranian people have a, not just a 5,000-year history of being Persians, which also resonates. I saw that. But they also have a deep and abiding faith, a pure faith. They believe in their system of religion. And it's an honest belief. It's not an imposed belief. These are not people being terrorized by dictatorial ayatollahs who say, "You must believe this." These are people who actually, my understanding of how Marja works, etc., these are people who empower ayatollahs. Because, again, I'm a student, but my understanding is once I pass through the education process and get to a certain rank, I have to write a religious thesis, basically my interpretation of how modern day society is impacted by religious law, and publish it. And then my margin doesn't work unless people come to me and say, we have trust in you, we have faith in you. That an ayatollah isn't imposed, an ayatollah is empowered by people who say, "We believe in you as a religious leader." This is my understanding, which means that this isn't a religious dictatorship. This is actually religious democracy. But we in America can't understand that. I want to have this conversation. I want to have other conversations. This could go on forever. But the most important thing is that we have to start treating the Iranians as human beings. One of the highlights of my adult life is meeting Professor Morandi. I've met you many times, long distance. We've had conversations, and intellectually, we get along. I mean, there's a commonality there, but you never really learn about a human until you meet the person, see them in person, see how they are, see the totality of. I don't know what he thinks about me. I can come off as very abrasive. I'm your typical American, and for the better or for worse. But I will tell you this: that Dr. Morandi is the best ambassador the people of Iran could have, because he is honest, he has integrity, he is kind, he is intelligent, he is strong when he needs to be strong. Don't let the soft voice fool you. There's a core of steel in this man that I think is replicated throughout Iran. And this, what I'm trying to say to the American audience is, you need, before you buy into the propaganda being put forward by the U.S. government, take the time to learn about the Iranian people. It's the message I've used about Russia. The best way to defeat Russophobia is to go to Russia, experience Russia, capture the reality of Russia, and bring it back to the United States. Well, I have a new mission. It's a mission that I've always had curiosity. As I said, I've traveled to Iran before, and I've always said I want to go back. But the murder of 165 school children at Minab. My wife and I talked about it, and she said we have to do a better job of bonding with Iran. Now, I hope one day to bring her, and she very much wants to come to Iran, but she told me your mission must be to return to Iran. You owe it to the Iranian people to go to Iran, to meet with them, to stand in solidarity with them, but more importantly, to learn about them, to learn from them and bring that back, to do with Iran what you've been trying to do with Russia. So that's my mission now. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, but it's something I very much want to do because it's necessary. We don't have to be at war with one another. In fact, it should be just the opposite. We should learn how to live in peace and harmony. Okay. The Iranians were so receptive to me when I came, and I have a funny feeling that they'd be receptive to any American who came to their shores in good faith. Not as submissive. I don't submit to anybody. I'm an American. I have all that hubris and arrogance that Professor Morandi talked about resides in me. And it takes a long time for me to control that, because you have to control it through intellectualism. You have to think, and then you have to open up your heart and be a human being and realize that hubris and arrogance only causes problems. There's nothing wrong with being proud of who you are. Everybody should be proud of who they are. But there's an absolute necessity to recognize in the other that they too have a right to be proud and that we are equals in this world together. And so that's what I want to try and accomplish, is to show Iran to the American people so that we view the Iranians as equals. Okay. And if we do that, anything's possible.
Okay.